Okay, joining us today is Dr. Syed, a board-certified trauma surgeon with 9 years of experience. He completed a fellowship in trauma surgery at Johns Hopkins, and Dr. Syed has seen it all, from high-speed collisions to emergency surgeries in the middle of the night. And today, he's going to walk us through his journey, his lessons, and his advice for future doctors. Thank you for joining me today, Dr.
Thank
Syed.
you for having me.
No worries. So let's just jump right into it.
Sure.
Okay. Dr. Syed, you walk into the trauma bay, alarms are blaring, and everyone's eyes are on you. What is the first thing you do to get control of the room?
Sure. So it's really easy to lose focus when there's so much chaos going on. I think the biggest thing is just remembering that if you don't control the room, nobody else is going to.
Right.
So usually what I'll do is I'll have the senior resident who's on call will be running the trauma. I usually don't do too much. I stand in the back and just kind of like oversee everything, make sure everything's going well, because sometimes they'll get really involved too. But like, yes, one of the biggest things we always say is like crowd control. Like whenever there's a crazy trauma that comes in, we'll have like, there's something like 20, 30 people that just show up to the trauma bay, and it's like, about 15 of those people don't need to be there, and they just want to be there to see what's going
Medical
on.
students, right?
Well, not so much medical students. You'd be surprised. It's just like all people, like nurses that are in the ER, just anybody that hears like, oh, there's an exciting trauma coming in, I want to see it. But yeah, one of the biggest things is just like you do have to get control of the room. And there's been times where I've had to like just tell everybody to stop and freeze and like just make sure everyone knows what they're doing, because it's chaotic. Like traumas never come in when you expect them. They're always unexpected, right? And sometimes the time that it takes them to get to the hospital is very short, or like we'll hear about it right when they arrive at the hospital. And you'll see people running to get like a bed in place, get like all the things that we need, get the lines, get the IVs, get everything. So it's obviously, if you can be prepared for it, it's better. But when it gets chaotic like that, it is important to just like focus on what's the most important thing, and that's the patient as a whole.
Okay, nice. And so you mentioned that there's up to 30 people in the room, right? Who would you say are the most important people?
Okay. So the people that we really need there is, we need our residents, we need a trauma surgeon, we need anesthesia to be there as well. We need nurses too. Nurses are probably the most important people in these traumas. So we have a nurse that'll be helping with lines and like getting on all the monitors and all that stuff, and then we'll have one who's just standing in the back documenting. Now, along with that comes a lot of extra people. So with anesthesia, there's always like a CRNA that comes down. There's usually like another student that comes down too. And I mean, they usually just stay where they need to stay and do what they need to do. So I try my best not to kick people out of the room, unless you can't like physically move to where you need to get, because there's so many people in the way.
Right.
But those are like the essential people that I would say that you need would be at least 2 nurses, anesthesia, and the trauma team.
Okay. And the trauma team, does that consist just of the doctors, or does that include the nurses and the anesthesiologists? Okay,
so it depends. Like, so we have our big trauma nurse over at Syed. His name's Jamie Gannon. He's in charge of like everything. So if it's during the day, he'll come down too. But otherwise, it's just us. So it's whoever the trauma surgeon is that's on call. It usually will be at least 2, if not 3 residents, and if it's 2 residents, then we'll have like a couple PAs that are on the team that'll come down and help as well.
Okay. So, I'm assuming traumas don't happen, every day, right?
So level 1 traumas, ones that get activated overhead, that brings in the whole team, the anesthesia, everybody. They don't happen every day. There are days that I've been on call that we don't get a single trauma, but we'll still get like the level 2 traumas, which they don't activate them overhead.
Okay.
We'll get trauma consults and things like that. So There have been days that have gone by where there hasn't been a single trauma, and like I always like have to check my phone and like give it a couple hits to make sure it's working, make sure I'm not missing the pages or anything like that. But yeah, there are days where there's not much going on.
And when there isn't anything going on, like, are you just sitting around in the hospital, or were you doing something?
So at our institution at LifeBridge Health and at Sinai, what we do if I'm on trauma over there, I'm also covering all of like the emergency general surgery, so all the acute care service as well. So there'll be patients to round on. There'll be consults for that, like hernias, abbeys, gallbladders, all those things that come in as well. And then there's tons of like paperwork that's always falling behind, for me at least. Like I'll like usually when I have a day that's not too busy, I'll just work on all these notes that I haven't gotten to, plan other things like planning lectures for you guys and try to make things look better and all that type of stuff.
Now, let's say you were in a surgery and a trauma gets called. What do you do?
Sure. Okay. And this happens a lot. So what I'll do is it depends on who the resident is that's on call. So if we have a senior resident, the way our hospital is over at Sinai is that a senior resident can run a trauma all by themselves.
Okay.
So if it's it depends. I try to weigh out where I would be more beneficial. Like if it's a pretty challenging OR case and I have a senior, I'll just stay in the OR and keep working on the case and let the resident go down and just have them call me right away if there's any issues or anything like that. Now, there was one time that I remember I was doing a gallbladder at like 7 o'clock in the evening or something, and 2 trauma arrests came in, and I had a senior resident, but it was a lot to handle. So luckily we were just about to finish up the gallbladder. So I think I had the medical student close up the wounds and like made sure everything was safe at that point. But then like had to go down and helped out with the traumas.
Okay. So you went to medical school and then you decided that you want to pursue surgery, right? Why surgery?
Sure. So I think I was telling you this before. I never really wanted to do surgery, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about how much I did not want to do surgery. But for me, it was just one good experience. Let me actually tell you this. So when I was in medical school, I hated anatomy. I couldn't tell what was what in anatomy lab. Everything looked the same. I didn't do well on my anatomy practicals. I thought I was going to do emergency. I really just liked emergency. And so when I was a third year medical student, the apartment where I was living was actually next door to this hospital where they have the easiest surgical rotation. So that's what I signed up for. When I mean easy, I mean like you got to show up at like 9 o'clock, and if there wasn't anything going, you'd get to leave by like 2 or like 3 or something. And I could walk over there too. So I started there. I think it was like probably just a few days after starting there, I got a call from one of the residents at the other hospital, which is supposed to be like the intense one, which is like you go there if you're interested in surgery. And they called me and they said one of the students who was rotating there got in a car accident, so she couldn't drive to get to the hospital anymore, so they had to put her at a hospital where she could get to without a car. So they asked me if I could come over there, and I was like, all right, sure. I really, really didn't want to, but it ended up being awesome. So like, these are the parts that were not awesome, but like, so all of a sudden, instead of getting there at 9 o'clock, I had to get there at like 5 o'clock, right?
In the morning.
Like, right, exactly. And like, leaving no way would it be like 2 or 3. It was like 6 o'clock, like sometimes much later. But my experience there, like, I felt like I was brought into the team. Like there were a few residents there. This one guy, his name is Matthew Schutzel. He was just like a really, really good leader and like he just took care of you if you worked hard. And then there were these 2 residents. So the residency that we were kind of working with, they also had, at this big hospital, they had residents coming from Mount Sinai in New York, and there were these 2 residents that I really remember that I was talking to my wife about yesterday. One guy's name is Dan Fremed, and the other guy's name was Dan Hen.
You remember their names?
Oh, totally. They were just like, and there was another guy, Steve Spinell. They were just like really, really, like they wanted to teach you. They wanted you to learn. They made it exciting. They got you involved, and that's all it took for me. Right after doing that, I was like, wow, this is what I want to do. I want to be like these people. And that's what got me into surgery, I think.
Okay, so then You applied to surgery residency, got in. How was that?
Sure. So I am a DO, and it was kind of at the time where there were still DO and like allopathic residencies. So it just trying to be like realistic, I had a better chance getting into a DO residency than an allopathic residency. So I applied broadly to the majority of that osteopathic residencies, and I ended up getting into the one that's kind of connected to my medical school. And it was an experience. My program was a little bit newer, and like it's just, there wasn't like the biggest feeling of like family. Like when you look at the residents here at Sinai, you can tell they all spend time outside of the hospital
Right.
together. They have events that they do. So in that way, that was kind of like a downside to the program, but it was good training. Honestly, when I came out of at the end of my residency, I didn't feel like I was quite ready to get into like practice and just go operate by myself, which is why I started pursuing like something else, and that's how I got into that fellowship for trauma.
Okay, so your residency was in general surgery, correct?
It was in general surgery, yeah, sorry.
And then you finished that, and then you said you applied to trauma surgery?
So what I did was, when I was done with my residency, like towards the end, you start kind of looking for jobs and things like that. And so there's a lot of websites out there that show like critical care, like any type of fellowship positions that aren't filled. And so at first I was looking at critical care. So, and then I realized that whole year of critical care, and I actually got it. I interviewed to a couple places and got into a few places, and then kind of looked at the whole thing and realized that a lot of the critical care programs for that year of critical care, you're not going to be in the operating room that much. You're going to be doing all the ICU stuff, and if you're lucky, you can take like some extra call and get involved in trauma and this and that. But the programs where I looked, it was more just like critical care ICU, and then I started to think, the reason I'm looking for something is because I want to get some additional training, right? So keep in mind that a lot of critical care fellowships are 2 years. Some of them are not, but the only year that you actually need to become board eligible or for critical care is the first year, and that's like the ICU year. So some places like Hopkins, for example, or somewhere where they have a lot of trauma, they'll offer a second year, but typically they'll keep those reserved for their first year fellows, right? But then there's a lot of fellows who are like, all right, I'm done, I feel good, I'm ready to go out and practice. So those spaces, like they'll end up being available kind of last minute. And I saw there was this one at Hopkins, and so it's the second year of the critical care fellowship.
Okay.
So keep in mind that means that I am not board certified or board eligible in critical care. So when I'm at Sinai, I can't actually round in the ICU and manage patients because I'm not board certified or eligible for critical care.
But you did do 1 year in critical care.
I did, so it wasn't critical care. It's actually it's the second year of like a trauma/critical care fellowship, but it's dedicated to just like trauma and being like an acute care surgeon.
Okay.
So what you do is like I didn't really rotate through the ICU at all through that year. I just kind of get added on to their call list like an attending, and like for the first few calls, like there's somebody in house with you just to make sure that you're comfortable. But then after that, they just let you go. So it was mostly for the additional operative experience. So I operated a ton in that year, and it gave me exactly what I wanted. It gave me that extra just extra confidence to go out and practice and like operate by myself and feel comfortable doing it.
Okay. And how hard, we hear Johns Hopkins, and it's like, I believe, the 4th hospital in the world. Was it hard to try to get into that hospital for a fellowship?
So what I really like about places like Hopkins is they look at you. They definitely look at numbers and things like that too, but at no point when I actually was applying to Hopkins did they ask me for any scores or numbers or anything like that. They just wanted to see letters, and they wanted to see who I was. I had to be persistent, and I was pretty persistent. Like I remember I started off by emailing the director of the program and he was like very honest with me. He said, yeah, we're considering a few other people, this and that. And I just kept like, I just persisted. I just kept asking him like over and over. Like, I mean, I didn't like go crazy, but like every like week or so I would just follow up, and eventually he was like, yeah, well, okay, we would like to have you down here to interview. So it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be to get in. And like I remember when I started, I was so nervous. I was like, I'm at Hopkins. I went to this little residency program. I'm a DO, but it was such a good experience. Like there's a good like family feeling there with like surgeons that you've never even met. Like I remember a few cases that I needed like there was like a CBD injury for a guy who stabbed himself, and I remember like it was in like
stabbed himself.
Yeah. He
why was he doing that?
Tried to kill himself.
Oh.
But there was just for some reason like there was a transplant case going at like 2 a.m. or something when this happened, and I remember I just like peeked over there, asked the guy like, hey, can you come in and just kind of check this out real quick? And like just came right over, helped out with exactly what we need. He didn't like come in and just take over. He was like, okay, this is what I think you need to do. Like if I'm gonna go back, if you guys can do this, like just let me know if you need any help. And so that's really good. Like having help when you need it is like it's good. It's very
important,
necessary, right,
when you're a surgeon. Right. So were you saying that guy scrubbed out of his transplant case to come help you with the common bowel?
Yeah. I think they might have been in a part of their transplant where like the resident or the fellow was doing like the majority of it. So it was just nice that he could actually come over and help us.
That's really nice. I was at Johns Hopkins last week, right? I got invited by Dr. Lee to come and meet a surgeon that's working on a robot to be used in space. And as soon as I walked in there, that place looked beautiful.
It's amazing.
Everything was like nice white marble. They had like a 2-story Christmas tree.
Yeah.
It felt very official. You know, I walked in, they had to search my bag before I went upstairs. Right. Every doctor had like their long white coat. You know, their tags had like extra letters at the end of them. Right. It was a very nice experience. Was it like that when you were there too?
Yeah. I mean, I remember I don't keep track of my steps, but I definitely got all the steps in that I needed, right? Like it's a huge place. It's I really liked that feeling. I actually don't like big places that much. I prefer smaller hospitals like Northwest compared to Sinai. But it was just like, it was a different place. It was really nice.
That's actually a good point you bring up. When somebody's trying to pursue a residency, do you prefer that they go into, you know, a bigger residency like Johns Hopkins, or should they go more rural to try to learn more?
Sure. I think ultimately you kind of it's hard to decide before you start, but like if you kind of have an idea of where you want to end up and what you want to do, then you could pick one over the other. But I think ultimately you're going to get this like an equivalent training no matter where you go, because they have like all these things like regulations and stuff. So in order to have a residency program, you have to have a place where you're going to be able to do like plastics. You have to have a place where you're going to be able to do transplant, like colorectal. And while your small hospital may not offer that, like you'll be going somewhere where you will be doing that.
Okay, so you won't just be in that one rural area. They'll actually send you out to bigger hospitals.
Unless that one rural hospital can give you all the training that you need, which more than likely it won't be able to.
Okay. Because when I was on the Johns Hopkins website the other day, and they have every residency you can.
Right.
So do these residents in different residencies like neurosurgery, general surgery, or trauma surgery fellowships, or internal medicine resident, do they fight over patients? Not really. So one of the things that you can kind of look back at is like how you said, like when you walk in, like how big and like how giant the place is. There's like no shortage of patients for anyone. I feel like no, there's not. I didn't feel like there were people like fighting for patients or fighting to get into cases or anything like that. There's just so much going on there. Okay. And how difficult would you say, you know, your training was, whether that be in residency or the fellowship?
So residency was tough. There were times when I struggled a lot, and I think a lot of people will say that things like just all of a sudden connect and everything kind of comes together. Like at first you get really good at like seeing patients, presenting patients, finding out if they need to go to the operating room or not. And then you slowly start to do like you start to operate and things like that. And for me, like a lot of the technical skills with operating took a little bit longer for everything to click together. And like I feel like most people by their third year or fourth year things are really clicking. For me, it was like by the end of my fourth year. I feel like but like by fifth year things like really started to come together. And so residency was tough. Fellowship was challenging, but I feel like it was almost like transitioning into like being an attending. So it got a little easier. Like I could really rely on like the residents and I like in my head just thinking, I remember being like more down and like feeling like this is a big struggle more in residency than in fellowship.
What would you say a typical day in residency was? Like what time would you wake up in the morning? And while you answer that, I'm just gonna keep checking.
Sure, yeah, no
check
problem,
to see
no problem.
if it's still recording.
Okay, so a day in residency, in my program, it varied so much because we went to so many different hospitals. But typically, like I'll use like the hospital that I really liked. It's called Englewood Hospital. I lived like about 15 minutes away from there. I would get there probably around like 6, I think. We'd quickly kind of, it was either 6 or 6:30. We would get sign out from the night person about anything that's going on, and then we would go around and like see our patients, get our notes in, and then like be operating for the rest of the day, and like seeing consults as they come in and things like that. But yeah, so the typical day would start somewhere between 6 and 6:30, and would usually end somewhere around like 6 in the evening or so.
Okay. You know what was surprising to me, because right now I'm in my surgery rotation here at Northwest. I always thought that a surgeon is just in the operating room. They barely see any patients. They barely talk to any patients because their patients are always sedated. But then I come here and I notice that no, surgery is a lot more than just being in the operating room. You're actually going upstairs, rounding, seeing patients.
Yes, and you'll see there's some specialties where they don't have to actually round that much because they're like ENT, for example. A lot of like the cases that they do are like kind of outpatient cases. But yeah, no, you'll see the patients pre-op. You have to like evaluate them and all that stuff. I think like more with acute care surgery, just because we're running like a service where we constantly like turn over, then like you do end up going and seeing patients. Like you've seen, like I have clinic here every Wednesday or every other Wednesday. But yeah, you do spend a lot of time with patients who are awake.
Yeah. Do you like that, or do you prefer that they're all?
I like it. I like it. I like just getting to have a conversation with people. And what I've found is, like based on like, especially when you meet a patient for the first time, like if you put yourself in their shoes, like they are coming to you because they need surgery for something, or they think they need surgery for something, and like you have to be able to trust that person, right? Like if you're gonna say, hey, go ahead, operate on me, put me to sleep, do what you need to do, and operate on me, you want to be able to trust that patient. So I feel like whenever I do have the time, I sit down and talk with patients and just try to make them feel comfortable about everything, that why we're doing it, what the alternatives are, like what the benefits are of doing the surgery, why sometimes you don't need to do the surgery. And
so what is the most common surgery that you do nowadays?
It's probably gallbladders. I feel like I used to do a lot of hernias, and now I'm kind of transitioning to like doing them robotically, which I still haven't really done much of that yet. But especially the hernias, like I've started doing gallbladders robotically, which is a great tool to have. We get a decent amount of appendices. We get like perforated ulcers quite a bit. And then like we get a ton of small bowel obstructions. a lot of them they're patients who have had previous surgery, so we try to manage them conservatively. But there are a lot of patients that we have to operate on for bowel obstructions too.
And you mentioned that now you're doing them robotically. So how did you used to do them before?
So gallbladders, appies, hernias would be, well, not hernias, but gallbladders and appies would all be laparoscopic.
Okay, and for the people that don't know, can you try to explain what laparoscopic means?
Sure. So laparoscopic is like a minimally invasive approach. So instead of like making a big cut to get into where you need to get into and put your hands in there, we make smaller cuts. So for example, like for a gallbladder, you'll make 4 small little cuts. You'll fill their belly up with carbon dioxide. You'll put a camera in so you can see, and then you have these instruments like a video game, and that's how you do your surgery. So you're not having to put your whole head in. The thought is that like the patient's going to have less pain, and there's less of a scar. They return to work quicker. They get back to their usual life quicker.
Right, and then how is the robot working then?
Okay, so the robot, the benefit that I find with the robot is that so if you imagine when you're doing laparoscopic stuff, you're holding 2 sticks, so you can't really rotate the end like how a wrist can, right? But whereas the robot has that ability. I mean, you're sitting on this console and you can really like make so one of the benefits, like you can really make it rotate the way that you want, whereas like, so one of the benefits that I've found is for like some of the challenging gallbladders, laparoscopically, you can do them, but you just have to, like, I feel like I'll have to change instruments and like sometimes put one way over here, put one way over here, put one over here, like do something that you don't usually do. Whereas robotically, like you can just like, you can swing your instrument around and it can curve the way that you want it to because it has that wrist capability.
So with laparoscopic, the patient is, let's say, on this table here, and you're standing right next to them with the instruments.
Correct, yes.
With the robot, where's the surgeon?
Sure. So you're actually sitting at a console that's in the same room, but it's away from the actual patient. So when you're doing that, you don't have to like be scrubbed. You still wear a mask, you still wear a hat, but you don't have to, like, you're not wearing sterile gloves or anything like that. Now you obviously you participate in like docking the robot and getting it all set up and everything like that, and then at the end with closing. But yeah, the majority of the case you're just sitting at a console and looking at the.
I've also noticed that some surgeons take their shoes off when they're on the robot. Is that just to be able to feel it better?
So I remember when I was in training, Intuitive is the company that makes the Da Vinci robot. The rep who I've been working with really closely was like, yeah, kick off your shoes, get nice and comfortable. And he was telling me why. He was like, some people like just. Like it's just the direct contact. Your foot is right on the pedal, right? Like, I mean, because your pedal is going to control a lot of stuff. Like you can control your camera with it, you can control your electrocautery, you can control all those different things. So I tried it a few times without my shoes on, and then I was like, I don't know what people have been stepping in, and so I was like, I'm just going to keep my shoes on.
Right, because you're in the OR. There's
right. Like imagine
fluid everywhere.
Well, yeah, imagine the people that use the robot with their shoes on. They've probably stepped in some nasty stuff. Right?
So do you still do any trauma cases, or are you more of a general surgeon right now?
I do trauma cases. My time is split between here and Sinai Hospital. So I do take trauma call over there. Every now and then I'm on the service for the week. And so yeah, I get exposed to a decent amount of trauma. It's nice.
So how do you balance working at 2 separate hospitals as a surgeon?
Okay. So usually I won't be like required to be at one hospital and then like the other hospital like in the same day, although it does happen sometimes. But it's like, so for example, if I'm working here till like a Sunday and I operate on a patient on Sunday that needs to stay in the hospital, then whoever's coming on for the next week will manage that patient. And sometimes I'll be curious and want to know, and I'll shoot them a message, or I'll shoot the residents a message, just be like, hey, how's this person doing? But it works out quite well. It's because I'm not expected to be at both places at the same time.
Okay. And I've heard conversations between medical students, and one medical student will be like, I really want to go into surgery, and the other medical student would be like, don't you want to raise a family? How are you going to raise a family and become a surgeon at the same time?
Yeah.
So what were some of the struggles that you went through with, I guess, the time management between surgery and family?
Okay, that's a good question. So when I was in residency, I got married to my wife, who's also a surgeon. When I was in fellowship is when we had our first baby. That was tricky because for fellowship, my wife and me were living in Bethesda, and Hopkins is up here in Baltimore, right?
How far is that?
It's about 45 minutes if there's no traffic. It's about an hour and a half to 2 hours if there is traffic. And the reason was she was doing like a internship or like a fellowship program with Kaiser. So she was down at like 3 locations down around Bethesda. So that was tough. Like I remember I'd have to leave super early, come back really late after sitting in traffic, and then there's a baby there that's crying and needs attention too. Those were tough times, but luckily I had family that could come and help. Like my mom actually helped raise my brother's 3 kids, so she's really good with kids, so she helped out a lot.
Is he a doctor as well?
He's not. No, he's not. He was the smart one. No, just kidding. So fellowship was tough in that way, but it was like a fun challenge. And then now work, like with being an attending now, I have no complaints about my job at all. I'm actually like I feel like I have like a pretty good gig, like a good setup. Like I do have a lot of time for my family now I have a second kid. So my older one is going to be turning 5 in February, and my younger one is going to be turning 2 in a couple weeks.
Oh, nice.
So I have it really good. When I'm on call here at Northwest, I'm on call. I have to be available, but I don't have to be in the hospital, right? So like I'll come in, and you've seen there's days when I don't even operate, right? Because there's no cases, so I have to come in around. I see patients, I take care of whatever I need to, and then I can go back home. This hospital, I live about like 15 minutes away from here, so it's really easy to just come back in if I need to do anything, or if I get called in for surgery or anything. When I'm at Syed, because it's a trauma center, we're in-house. So like when I'm there, I'm there. So there's
what do you mean by that? When you're there, you're there.
I'm physically in the hospital while I'm on call. So for example, I'm on call at Sinai this Sunday. So I will get there at 7 in the morning, and I will stay there till 7 in the morning on Monday, and I'll be in the hospital. I can't leave because and it makes sense, right? Because if a trauma comes in, like you need to be there to respond to it. So this job like really allows me to balance things out quite well. I do get to spend time with my family a lot. I get to be there and see all these fun things happening and participate in some of these fun things. Like I get to like, for example, like I really love coffee, like espressos and lattes and things like that. And like I get to so it's something that I make like every morning if I have the time to. And obviously my daughter got curious, and she's not drinking the coffee by any means, but she's like looking at it, she's watching, and like so. And have you been to like the really nice coffee shops where like if you get a latte, they like make like a leaf, and so she can actually pour those.
Really?
She could do like I'll steam the milk and like give it to her, and she'll pour it, and she can make I'll show you when we're done with this. But so just things like that, like it's really nice to like watch her grow, watch her like just learn things from me, like look up to me. And whereas I could see like how like just for example, like if I was working like a 9-to-5 job or something like that, like I just wouldn't see her as much and be involved in her life. But I feel like grateful to have that opportunity, and like family is very, very important to me. It takes priority over everything,
of course. Yeah.
And it's nice. Like I've gotten my older daughter into like cooking too. I love to cook, so she like helps me out.
What do you like to cook?
Oh, okay. So I've recently been getting into cooking with the wok.
What is that?
You know, like what they make, like stir fries and Chinese food and stuff. There's like it's really cool. Like we have a really nice range or stove in our house where you can like flip the thing over. You can make it like so instead of like a regular flame, it's like a blowtorch that comes out, which is what you want for like a wok. And like you can do all these cool things. Like you can kind of like when you mix the food up, you can get the fire to come into your wok, and it's supposed to like give it some extra flavor and stuff like that. So I love cooking with the wok, and I just love cooking in general.
Okay, nice. So what I guess my next question was going to be, do you want your kids to become surgeons?
If that's something that they really want to do, yeah, but by no means am I going to try to push them in the direction of anything of this or that. A lot of the conversations that my wife and me have to do with like surgery stuff, so she catches on, like that they listen in. It's funny actually. I remember when my older daughter was like maybe like 3, she could tell you like how food goes from like your mouth to your esophagus to your stomach.
She knows that whole pathway.
To your small intestine, to your colon, and then comes out as poo poo. But yeah. So no. I don't. I want them to do what they want to do. Like it's. I've already seen that my older daughter really likes like things that are like art, like drawing, like dancing and things like that. So, I want her to do whatever she wants to do. Okay. And like I remember, so my parents didn't really push me too much. They pushed my brother a lot, being like an Indian family. That's it. Like it's like you're either gonna be a lawyer or like a doctor. Right. So they pushed him to go into medicine, and like he just didn't want to do medicine, so he never did it. And then they stopped. They didn't push me, but I kind of wanted to do it, so I ended up doing it.
Were your parents also physicians?
No.
Okay. And you mentioned that your wife's also a doctor. So do you guys, try to balance who stays home, who goes to work, or do you both go to work and get like a babysitter?
Okay. So right now things have worked out really well. So you can do these things called locums, where it's like agency work, it's like temporary work. So like for example in Maryland there's a ton of hospitals around here. So you just look through these agencies, you say, hey, I'm a surgeon, I wanna work, and like they'll find you dates to work and places to work. So she's been doing that, so it's not like she has a constant schedule or anything like that. And she finds out when she's gonna work like a few months in advance. So if she has like a time where she's gonna be working somewhere for a week, I'll try to get that time off so I can go with her and just help take care of the kids.
Nice. So it sounds like you really prioritize family. You're able to manage your schedule, even though you work very hard. And I always see you, in the hallways in this hospital.
I do put my family way up there. I think part of the reason that things go quite smoothly is just because I have like a great team of people that I work with. The PAs that I work with here, the residents that I work with, like they're all like very good.
Let's go back to trauma for a little bit.
Sure.
Can you walk us through like your most unforgettable trauma case that you've ever handled? And like what was the patient's situation when they arrived? How did it play out?
Yeah. So there's a lot of these that like come to mind, and like right when you say unforgettable trauma, I start thinking of Hopkins, and there were a few that were very similar to this, but like for some reason in Baltimore, when you get shot, like you just don't get shot once, you get shot like 15 times.
Sure,
like nobody gets shot once, and if they did, it's usually the police that shot somebody that's running away. So there have been a few that there's one that stood out quite a bit, that the guy came in after getting shot like I don't know how many times, but a lot of them went through his belly. And he was like really unstable. He was bleeding a lot. We got him into the operating room. He had a hole through his stomach, through his liver, through like tons of his small bowel, through his colon, through his pancreas, through a kidney. So like, I mean, we took out like half of this guy's organs, but they're just like, they're really exciting cases because you have to work fast, you have to work carefully, like you're by some really, really important structures. Like if you make like even the smallest mistake, you can get into a big vessel and they're gonna bleed and die, like no matter what you do. Now this guy ended up, so after we got everything out, after we took out the distal part of his pancreas and his spleen, there was some bleeding that was coming from like under the liver. and we thought it was going to be like a venous bleed, but it was bright red, and it was filling the field up like really quick, like scary, like you're starting to sweat and things like that. And we actually, what we had to do was, so what you want to do with, like, if you have a bleeding vessel, you always want to get control of that vessel, right? So you want to try to get proximal control if it's an artery, and I'm going to say like at some point distal control, but proximal control is the most important thing. So we couldn't get to this bleeding thing, or we couldn't like stop it. So like we could keep some pressure on it and slow it down a little bit. Then one of the things you can do is go up here, and you can get what's called superciliac control of your aorta.
And what do you mean by control?
So you just clamp the aorta off. So you're stopping the blood flow from going to where the hole is. So with this guy, it was really this, because there was bleeding up here too. We couldn't get in. So the next step is just go a step higher. So we had to perform a thoracotomy. So we had to go into the chest. You get the heart out. You get the aorta, and you just cross clamp the aorta up there. And then like you go back down to the belly, and like luckily it slowed the bleeding down. Somebody's still holding their finger. Like they took the finger off, and it slowed down a little bit. And I think this guy had a hepatic artery injury, and like we didn't. The repair wasn't that like we called vascular in, and I can't even remember what they did, if they just like shunted or something like that. But the guy actually ended up doing like well. He ended up doing really well. One of the downsides to some of these is like there are these little kids that like don't care. So they came in, like they have no idea what you just did to like save their life, and then like you see them the next day like, I want to leave. I want to get out. I don't want to be here anymore. It's frustrating when that happens, but like it's nice to be able to like save somebody's life who was like about to die.
Right, but that feeling of them not, I guess, being very appreciative of what you did, that must hurt a little bit.
So and it really depends. There's some people who really, really appreciate what you've done, and then there's some that don't. Just like every other field in medicine, you're going to get people who respect you. You're going to get people who don't. Just like anything, I guess. It does. But you can't let it bother you. If you let it bother you, then you're not going to want to do trauma anymore.
Right. So how does it feel when, the alarms of trauma one, we need the doctor into the trauma bay as soon as possible? How does that, make you feel when you first hear those sounds?
So the first thing I always hope for is that it's not a pediatric trauma.
Oh,
because I hate pediatric traumas.
Why do you hate them?
They're just these little kids that are hard to deal with. And I mean, luckily we're not a pediatric trauma center, so we don't get like any really bad pediatric traumas unless they're like going to die and they need to come to us. But so the way our system works is like we'll get a page, and the first page will be like level 1 trauma, and I'll see that on my phone, and then like what I find is that I'm waiting for the next text message that comes up, because that'll give us like a little bit of like it'll be like GSW not alerts, like this and that, or
GSW
like,
gunshot wound.
Right. So that's what I'm like always waiting for, is like that second text message, but I'm already walking to the trauma bay. And I think there's a lot of things that go on in my head. Like there's certain things in trauma that I don't have like as much experience with and would feel a little bit less comfortable with. But so I'm always hoping it's not one of those. But then like I try, as I'm walking over like really fast, to just take a few deep breaths and just like remember that like it's gonna be chaotic. It's gonna be like everything what we just talked about before.
Is your heart rate going up? Like, are you
I'm sure. So I'm usually not starting to sweat anymore, but I'm sure my heart rate is going up a little bit.
But you used to experience all.
Oh yeah. When I started, I used to get like so nervous when I would go down, especially like when I was in fellowship. Like the first few traumas that I like. So for example, like I remember the first day that I took call at Hopkins as a fellow. Throughout residency, I'd never seen a thoracotomy, which is where you, like an ER thoracotomy, where you cut into the patient's chest, like because they've died in front of you, or they've lost vitals, like they got shot in the chest or something like that. I've only like seen videos and read about it in books, and like the first day that I'm on call, like of course we get a thoracotomy, and like luckily it went well, but I remember being like so nervous about like everything about it. I mean, the patient didn't survive because thoracotomy patients usually don't survive, but it's just, and then you just get like, you get more and more experience, and you just get a little bit more like more and more calm. You have to have patience too, and having kids makes you patient whether you want to be patient or not.
And you said that when you respond to these trauma calls, you try to remain as calm as possible. How important is that?
I think that's one of the most important things, because if you're not calm, other people are not going to be calm. If you're not calm, you're not going to focus on like the most important thing, right? Like you could be like, okay, like things are crazy. This guy got shot. I got to focus on this, but like he could have another gunshot somewhere else that could be like compromising his or her life, right? Like, and if you just if you're not calm and step back and see all that, it's very easy to miss things.
Okay. So, what are the most common traumas you see here at Hopkins or Sinai?
At Sinai, so our location is not as like downtown in the city. So we do get a mix of like motor vehicle accidents, pedestrians that are struck by a car, a lot of gunshot wounds, a lot of stabbings. And then you always get like these old people that are on like blood thinners that fall and hit their head and have a brain bleed and things like that. But we get it. So a lot of like in trauma, I don't know. I think most trauma surgeons are like this. You want like penetrating trauma, like people that got shot, people that got stabbed, because those are the ones that you need to go to the operating room more likely than like blunt trauma, which is like a motor vehicle accident or somebody fell. It's like usually those ones are not so operative. Not for surgery, not for like a trauma surgeon, but those are the people who usually have like all the orthopedic injuries. So yeah, ortho is operating on them a lot, but not so much.
So let's say a patient experienced trauma, right? They send them to the emergency room where we have emergency room physicians, but then we also have trauma surgeons that also respond. So how does that dynamic work?
Okay. So if the patient is when the EMS sees the patient, if it's like a trauma, they'll call the trauma center, they'll present the patient to the nurse who's answering the phone, and then that person will decide, does this need to be labeled as a trauma, or is this just like a regular ER visit? If it's a trauma, then yeah, the ER doctor will usually still come down if it's like if the patient arrived and nobody else is there, or we'll come and see the patient. But for the most part, it'll just be like the trauma team that gets involved in it.
And the trauma team is a trauma surgeon and nurses, anesthesiology.
Yes.
Okay. And as a trauma surgeon, when you're responding to these traumas, who do you rely on the most? Because I feel like a lot of people are relying on you, being the trauma surgeon in the room. But who are you relying on the most?
I feel like I'm relying on the next person who's like right up to my level, which is going to be like the senior resident.
Okay.
Like the senior resident is kind of doing what I'm doing, and like running the whole thing, and then so they are doing what I do. So they're the ones that have to step back and see everything as well, and so they're the people that I rely on the most.
Okay. And since you have a senior resident in the room, are you kind of just watching them do their job, or are you telling them what to do? I'm
usually not telling them unless there's something that they're doing that's not right, or if they're not doing something that needs to be done, I'll just step in and like tell them, hey, like I need to stop this bleeding, or I need to put in a central line or something like that. Might need to put in a chest tube, but usually no. Usually I don't have to do too much.
Okay. And I'm assuming that some of these traumas are pretty graphic. How do you prepare for those? Like when you're first walking into the room and you have someone's, intestines everywhere, like.
And like surprisingly, the ones that are really graphic are not so much like with the intestines hanging out. It's more like the people that like got in a bad car accident, for example, we had this guy who was going 140 on his motorcycle and slammed into the back of a car that was probably going like 50 or 40 or something, and like he came to us and like the page on the trauma said like pulseless lower extremity, and the guy comes in and his leg is just like mangled, like it's all like twisted around. You can see a bone hanging out here, a bone over here, and like those are the ones that are like really graphic, and those images just kind of stick in your head. I don't know how it just becomes like normal almost. Honestly, like if I go into the OR and somebody has like a perforated colon and it smells like poop in their belly, I get more disgusted than like seeing an arm that's fallen off.
Do you get like ever like what's the right word? Like almost disgusted when you see situations like that, and then you have to just automatically turn it off, or is that just always off? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do. One thing that not with trauma. I feel like I don't like ever get really disgusted about it. Like one thing that's more like just general surgery type of thing is if I see a patient like actively vomiting, it makes me want to vomit like really bad. So that somehow I have to like switch that off in my head, or I need to like step outside for a second and then come right back. But for some reason, like the graphic trauma and like the gunshots. So surprisingly, another thing that's like when a patient gets shot with a gun, it doesn't look that bad on the outside. It looks worse on the inside, like when you get to the operating room. Sometimes, when somebody gets stabbed or like cut, like you'll see like there's some small intestinal omentum like hanging out and eviscerated. But usually it's, I don't know why it's not so bad.
Okay. And what was the most intense shift you've ever had?
It was probably when I was at Hopkins, just because there were times when we've had like somewhere between like 15 and 20 traumas over the course of 24 hours.
Wow. How do you manage that?
It's tough, but you just do what you have to. When you're like, the time flies by and you don't even notice because you're just doing something the whole time. Like when it actually gets hard is like when you sit down, or like when you're like that's when it's like, oh wow, I'm like really tired. And like so a lot of the times with those really crazy calls, like I would be expected to stay till 5 p.m. the next day because like I had some other thing going on, or I had clinic or something like that going on. So those were tough, but like just like anything, I feel like you just learn to do what you have to do. Like I remember when I was in college, like walking past the library, like on the way to a bar, and seeing people like going in with big books and like reading. I was like, there's no way I'm gonna do this. And like that's what I did for 4 years as a medical student, right? And then like, so I feel like you just do what you got to do.
Are there any specific patients that you still think about?
Yeah, there are. There's been like, I mean, and these are ones where, like, there's one that I definitely think about a lot, that like, I think it was mostly just because I got really close to the family, and they welcomed me, like they really like liked me, I really liked them, and like this lady had like a really tough surgery, and like she had cardiac problems, and like her heart stopped on the table, like everything like worked out okay, but like she's one patient that I think about a lot. I do think of like a few of them, but I think when I started, I probably thought about like most of them.
Okay.
Like, whereas now I feel like I don't think that much about them.
Okay. And how do you deal with patient deaths? I feel like as a trauma surgeon, you probably do see a lot of deaths.
Yeah.
Does that bother you?
Of course it does. It really bothers me because the majority of the trauma deaths are these like young kids who have a whole life ahead of them, and like you in your head you think like, oh okay, these are like kids who have like no supervision, like they're just going out causing all these problems and stuff, and then like you actually see that they have a mother or father that's there that like cares about them and is like crying like hysterically because their son is gone now. And that's really tough. There's still times that like I cry after this happens, and it's really tough, but like I think it's good to like have those feelings, but then you quickly have to move on because nothing stops, right? Like the hospital keeps going. Like you'll deal with one bad trauma patient died, you tell the family, they're hysterical, but like there's nothing to stop another trauma coming in like 2 minutes later.
Right.
You know, so yeah, no, it's that's the toughest part. Is when a patient doesn't survive. It's really tough. I mean, there are ones where like when they come in, you know they're already dead, but like it's still tough. It's still tough. You know there's nothing you can do, but then you see that family member that's like that just lost somebody, they're gone. That's it. So that like it's tough, and like it's tough. But just like everything else, I feel like you learn to just cope and like deal with it and like move on to the next patient.
I feel like that's probably one of the hardest things about being a physician is you see a death in one room and then you walk to the next one and you're dealing with the, you know, let's say like a very happy patient.
Yeah.
You just have to move on. You can't really you don't have time to process it.
Right. There's weird things that have happened that I remember that stood out when I was while I've been here actually is like I remember operating on like a trauma who ended up dying, and then like right after telling the family, you know, like when a new baby's born, they'll play the like the sound overhead, and like I remember hearing that like right after this patient like died, and it's like you just like it's weird, right? Like it's like somebody just died, somebody just came to life.
Wow,
it's a weird feeling, I have to say. But yeah. There's like the weird like things that just stand out and like stick in your head.
Yeah, life just moves on.
It does.
We're wrapping up here. Do you have any, general advice for medical students or residents who want to pursue trauma surgery in the future?
Yeah. So one really good thing about trauma that I like is that you're a general surgeon already, right? So like when you get sick of the trauma and when you don't want to do it anymore, you have the general surgery to fall back on, which is good. I would say like make sure you know what you're getting into. Like if you're interested in trauma, try to rotate at a hospital if you're a medical student where they do trauma and get exposed to it and see what it's like, and yeah, just do what you want to do. Like make sure you're doing something that you want to do. If you're not doing something that you enjoy doing, you'll just be miserable.
That's a good point. You know, when I look at your life, I see, family life. I see you working as a trauma surgeon, the deaths that you see, the happy moments, the sad moments, all the textbooks that you went through, all the knowledge in your brain. Is it all worth it at the end?
I think it's worth it. Yeah, I think it's worth it. Like we have the privilege of like saving people. That's crazy. I can go inside someone's body and like fix them up. Like that's like a crazy thing to be able to do. So yeah, I think it's all worth it, and I think what makes it a little bit more worth it is how I was saying, like I have this great job where I can balance things out. Like for training, it's good to be like busy all the time because that's what you're learning, and I feel like I did that through residency and fellowship. Then when you get out of fellowship and you have all these other things that are important to you, it's important to find that right balance. Like so, for example, I think if I tried to work at I would have to do a critical care fellowship if I wanted to do this. But if I decided to try to work at a place like Hopkins or Shock or something like that, I don't think I would be able to have the same balance with family. Who knows? Maybe I would, but I think it's a little different this way.
Okay, and I just have a couple rapid fire questions,
Sure.
if you don't mind. What makes a great trauma surgeon stand out from a good one?
I don't know. You got to ask one. I'm just kidding. I think that. Geez, wow, that's a good question. I think like just having the like being very calm in chaotic situations is really important. I mean, I don't think that I know a lot of trauma surgeons who are not calm in chaotic situations, but like I think that's really important.
Do trauma surgeons make mistakes?
Yes, definitely. Just like any other human being, we all make mistakes.
And do those mistakes haunt you?
Sure. Yeah. They definitely haunt you, but more what I've noticed is learning from that mistake and letting it never happen again, and in that way, it doesn't haunt me as much. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, so you just learn from it so that it doesn't happen again in the future.
Right.
Okay. What's one thing you would never do after seeing so many trauma cases?
Now, I remember when I first started rotating through, like, as a medical student at trauma centers, the first few places where I rotated were in, like, Brooklyn, where it was like people that are on bikes getting hit and this and that, and I was like, wow, there's no way I'm gonna ride a bike without a helmet. And then, like, that lasted for about a month, and then I started, like, not wearing a helmet again, and then I would see more trauma, and then I was like, no. So that's one thing that has, like, is in my head now. Don't ride a bike without a helmet. Okay. Did I say that right?
Don't ride a bike without a helmet.
Right. Don't ride a bike without a helmet. Make sure you're wearing a helmet if you ride a bike. What were some of the other things? Were just like making sure you look both ways before you cross the street. Maybe even look twice. Seeing some of the car accidents, I feel like I tell myself that I shouldn't drive as fast as I sometimes do, but some things don't change.
Still And this is the last question. How do you stay mentally strong with all the pressure of trauma surgery?
I think it's mostly because I like my job. That like it makes it a lot easier. Like I look forward to coming back the next day. And I feel like if I didn't like my job as well, it would be harder. Plus, like, there's a lot of things about this little hospital at Northwest. Like, I like a lot of things about it. It's a small hospital. I like seeing, like, some of the same faces every day. I like just coming in and, like, I know that, like, between the times of me walking in the door and walking out the door, I'm gonna bump into, like, at least 5 people who, like, I'll talk to randomly about nothing that's related to a patient. Like I like that. Like I feel like I'm a part of this hospital. Like even when I go to get lunch, which I rarely do at this cafeteria, but it's so good that when I get the opportunity to, I do. Like I like the person that makes my sandwich is like so nice. She's always like, "Hey, Robbie, how you doing?" But yeah.
So you enjoy that sense of community here?
I do. I really like it.
Okay. And you also manage the medical students that come.
Right. Yeah. This is something that's been like relatively new for me. But like it's fun. Yeah. I get to like form relationships with you guys. I get to see you guys go on, and like some people will come back and like want a letter, and then they'll tell me what they're doing. I'm like, oh wow, good for you. So it's really rewarding experience, I feel like.
Okay. Well, that wraps it up. I just want to say I really appreciate your time. Thank you. I'm surprised we made it almost an hour.
We had a lot of stuff to talk about, but like I think that was. Thank you for having me.
No worries.
It's a pleasure to be on.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right.